So in this passage from Jeremiah, we have the vision of the fig baskets. And the contrary word of the Lord, or the way that this is defies expectation, is that the idea in Jeremiah's Jerusalem was that those who'd been taken to Babylon were especially cursed, in a sense that God allowed that to happen to them because he was displeased with them and had rejected them. And so that the taking into exile was God's formal and final rejection of all those who were victims of the Babylonian deportation. In a sense, this was the previous line on the kingdom of Israel up in Samaria that had been deported by the Assyrians and essentially were lost to the people of Israel. They assimilated into kind of the Assyrian pagan culture, and those who remained behind would become the kind of precursors of the Samaritans. But in a sense, they'd been lost to the people of God as far as the people of Jerusalem were concerned, and now they figured, okay, these people are gone too, and God has rejected them. They're the bad figs. We're the ones who remain, and it's because God has blessed us, and so God must be very happy with us that he let us stay, and so we're going to build this city, and we're going to live here the way we want to without changing the behaviors and the oppression and the injustices that the word of the Lord said through Jeremiah caused the victory of the Babylonians in the first place. And so this contrary word that comes through the prophet Jeremiah is that no, I haven't rejected those who've been taken to exile. In fact, now that I've taken them out of this city and I've brought them to a place where they're going to have to learn to be completely dependent on my mercy and my sustaining power. See, we have to remember Daniel and the lion's den and the furnace, that basically I'm taking these people to bring them into a furnace. And yes, they've been taken into the lion's den, but I am going to preserve them, sustain them, and bless them, and they will be the future of my people. They have not been rejected, but they've been brought into a time of testing so that there can be a new life that comes forth from them. And those who are living kind of in plenty and complacency and kind of self-assurance in being in Jerusalem, those are the ones that I can't work with that. That's not, that human pride is going to be an obstacle to what I want to do in my people Israel. Those are the bad figs, the people who think that they can live life without me, the people who think that they just have my blessing coming to them without needing to share those blessings with everyone in the community. And so this word is a word of consolation to all of us when we find ourselves in a place of exile, when we find ourselves in the place of the lion's den, when we are tested in the furnace, when we have, in a sense, all the familiar landmarks of our lives, when they get stripped away by illness, when they get stripped away by unemployment, by losing a job by which we define ourselves, when we lose a relationship that was critical to our self-understanding, that when those sorts of things get stripped away, that that is not an indication that God has rejected us, but rather, if we can walk into those places, trusting in God's mercy, trusting in the future that the Lord has for us, that we can be revealed from the world's perspective, man, life has hit the skids. We're on the downward slope. But from the perspective of God's future, we become good figs in that very moment. We become something through which God can bring new life. That's the promise. That's the promise of the God we know through the prophets, and the God we know in Jesus Christ, who himself enters into the lion's den of the tomb, who enters into the furnace of death itself, and shows those places to be the places where he was the rejected one, he was accursed, he was without a future. But Jesus reveals that very place as the place where God's future can most powerfully burst forth. So if you come to this morning thinking that maybe you're in the basket of the bad figs, that you've been rejected by God, know that actually you are the best of God's work. He has a future for you, a blessing for you, even in the midst of loss, in the midst of grief, in the midst of suffering. In that very place, God has a blessing for you. He has a future for you. And it won't be a future of your own making. It won't be the future you wanted any more than that old king of Judah, wanted to be deported and become a prisoner in Babylon. We don't like our plans being disrupted. We don't like our lives as we know them being disrupted. But in that place of disruption and loss and grief and suffering, God can bring forth a new thing that is even better in reflecting his new creation than that which we formerly knew. A reading from the prophet Jeremiah. The Lord showed me 2 baskets of figs placed before the temple of the Lord. This was after King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had taken into exile from Jerusalem King Jeconiah, son of Jehoiakim of Judah, together with the officials of Judah, the artisans and the smiths, and had brought them to Babylon. One basket had very good figs, like first-ripe figs, but the other basket had very bad figs, so bad that they could not be eaten. And the Lord said to me, "What do you see, Jeremiah?" I said, "Figs, the good figs very good, and the bad figs very bad, so bad that they cannot be eaten." Then the word of the Lord came to me, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, like these good figs, so will I regard as good the exiles from Judah, whom I have sent away from this place to the land of the Chaldeans. I will set my eyes upon them for good, and I will bring them back to this land. I will build them up and not tear them down. I will plant them and not pluck them up. I will give them a heart to know that I am the Lord, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God, for they shall return to me with their whole heart. But thus says the Lord, like the bad figs that are so bad they cannot be eaten, so will I treat King Zedekiah of Judah, his officials, the remnant of Jerusalem who remain in this land, and those who live in the land of Egypt. I will make them a horror, an evil thing, to all the kingdoms of the earth, a disgrace, a byword, a taunt, and a curse in all the places where I shall drive them. And I will send sword, famine, and pestilence upon them, until they are utterly destroyed from the land that I gave to them and their ancestors." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.